She showed up with a clipboard, a camera, and a lawsuit. Said my bird feeder was a nuisance to the community and was violating local wildlife density codes. I thought she was joking until the papers came. But what she didn't know, the birds weren't the only ones I'd been feeding. My name's Daniel Fletcher. I'm 42, retired military, and after 2 decades of deployments, all I wanted was peace and quiet. I bought this house in a sleepy cul-de-sac because it backed onto a little patch of woods. Nothing fancy, just squirrels, pines, and birds. Lots of birds. When I first moved in, I'd sit on the porch at dawn with my coffee and watch them: finches, jays, cardinals. It reminded me of my grandfather. He was a birder too. Kept a weathered journal with species checklists and feeder logs, and when he passed, I inherited it. Setting up my own feeder wasn't just about the birds. It was about him, about healing, about coming back to myself after everything I'd seen overseas. So when the HOA said my feeder was a public threat, I laughed. But then the letters came, the citations. The fine schedule, 100. One woman said the birds were stalking her chihuahua. Another claimed their droppings were killing her lawn. Where are you watching from? And have you ever had to fight for something that felt small but meant everything? Stick with me, because what started with a $12 metal feeder turned into court dates, bylaws, and an army of sparrows that wouldn't back down. They wanted the birds gone, but they forgot one thing: you don't mess with a man who's used to defending his post. Before everything got messy, before the notices, the fines, the court summons, things were good, better than good. Mornings in my neighborhood were calm, almost sacred. The kind of quiet that settles, not just in the air, but in your bones. The sun would rise over the eastern pines, casting long golden shadows that slid gently across my backyard like slow-moving silk. I'd pour a cup of black coffee in the same mug every morning, chipped enamel, a faded bald eagle on the side, and step out onto the porch. That's when they'd come. Chickadees, mourning doves, Carolina wrens, house finches. They arrived in pairs, in flocks, sometimes solo like drifters on the highway. They'd flutter down from tree branches, like living ornaments, chirping at one another, like breakfast regulars at a small-town diner, and I knew them. Not just by species, by rhythm, by behavior. I started naming a few, not out of whimsy, but out of respect. General MacArthur, the dominant blue jay, had a Napoleon complex. Lillian, a shy goldfinch, always appeared right after sunrise and vanished before the heat. There was Rascal, a gray squirrel, who thought he was a bird and kept trying to leap onto the feeder with disastrous results. My feeder wasn't fancy, just a copper-framed, plexiglass box I'd bought online, filled with black oil sunflower seeds, millet, cracked corn. A good general mix, hung just under the awning beside an old wind chime my grandfather gave me when I was 13. That feeder, that little box of seeds, turned my backyard into a sanctuary, and in some ways, it turned me into myself again. After years of structure, sand, and steel, I had finally found a place where I could breathe again. Not just survive, but exist. I didn't have to wear a uniform. I didn't have to bark orders. I could just sit and listen. And log sightings in the old leather notebook my grandfather used to carry. My home sat near the edge of the subdivision, a quiet corner lot that bordered a slim patch of county woods. There was a nature trail just beyond the fence, a dusty little path where joggers and strollers passed by in the early evening. You'd hear dogs barking faintly, kids on scooters, the distant thrum of a leaf blower. But mostly, it was still. When I moved in, I didn't know a soul. I bought the house in November, just before the first frost. Holidays came and went quietly. I fixed up the inside, painted the cabinets, replaced the carpet, built a raised bed for herbs. In spring, I started planting pollinator-friendly flowers. Bee balm, purple coneflower, coreopsis. They came alive with bees and butterflies. By May, I had a rhythm. Coffee at feeder check by 7. Morning sit, from 7:15 to 8. Logging activity and refilling the water dish. And it was around that time the neighborhood began to notice me. A couple down the street invited me to their Memorial Day barbecue. I wore a tucked-in polo and brought deviled eggs. There was lemonade, cornhole, a heated discussion about lawn edging, and a playlist of soft country songs that made everyone sway just slightly. That's when I met Karen. She was the self-appointed queen of hospitality, aviator sunglasses, wide-brimmed sun hat, a pink paisley scarf around her neck like she was headed to a desert shoot for a 1960s film. She greeted me with a rehearsed smile and said, "Welcome to the friendliest HOA this side of the Mississippi." Her husband chuckled. I laughed along, and for the briefest moment, I thought, this is going to work. Karen was neighborly at first. She waved when she drove by. She once brought me banana bread in a red basket with a doily lining. Tucked beneath the loaf was a copy of the HOA rules, laminated, highlighted. "Just a welcome gift," she said, with a smile I didn't yet know how to read. I didn't read them. I should have. Instead, I was focused on nesting activity. The wrens had built a little den in the trellis. I started noticing more finches, females especially. Migration was happening early that year, and I was too busy photographing, identifying, and feeding to think about anyone else's opinion of my setup. Occasionally, I'd hear distant barking or someone dragging trash bins, but the birds always returned. Like clockwork. Like ritual. They didn't care about bylaws. They just wanted seed, safety, and sunlight. Sometimes, I wondered if the quiet annoyed Karen. I'd be on my porch, mug in hand, watching a pair of tufted titmice nibble away, and I'd feel her eyes just a flicker from behind her curtain across the street. Other times it was more obvious. She'd walk by with her tiny dog in tow, stop mid-stride, and scan the bushes like she was expecting to find something illegal. Back then, I chalked it up to curiosity. Maybe even a touch of loneliness. But slowly, subtly, things shifted. She stopped waving, started walking her dog on the opposite side of the street. Once, I caught her standing at the end of my driveway, just staring. It didn't register then. I was too deep in my joy, too anchored in the rhythm of migration and molting seasons, to think this neighborly cold front was anything more than mood. But looking back now, that was the first gust of the storm. It began with a note, folded once, taped to my front door, no envelope, no signature, just a single sheet of printer paper, with the words, "Bird feeders attract rodents. Please remove immediately." At first I thought it was a joke. Or maybe a concerned neighbor, someone misinformed. I chuckled, shrugged it off, and fed the birds like usual. If they were really worried about pests, I thought, maybe they should check under their own decks before coming after a seed feeder. 3 days later, I received an official email from the HOA board, subject line, "Violation notification, unapproved wildlife attraction structure." That's how they phrased it. Not bird feeder, not hobby, a wildlife attraction structure. It sounded like I was running a petting zoo out of my backyard. The sender? Karen Stevens, HOA secretary. The same Karen who had once handed me banana bread and smiled like we were neighbors in a Norman Rockwell painting. Her email was cold, overly professional. Attached was a PDF of the HOA rulebook with a section highlighted in yellow. No resident shall place structures or objects in common or private areas that encourage overpopulation of nuisance wildlife, including but not limited to deer, raccoons, possums, or birds. They put birds in the same category as raccoons. I replied, "The feeder is on my private property. I've seen no signs of rodent activity. Happy to discuss." I even attached 3 photos: clean patio, fresh mulch, no seed scatter, no droppings, no response. That Saturday morning, I stepped outside to refill the feeder. Karen was across the street, trimming her roses with a small pair of red-handled clippers. Her posture was sharp. She didn't wave this time, just glanced up, locked eyes with me for half a second, and looked away. Monday, a certified letter arrived. $150 a day fine if the feeder wasn't removed within 10 business days. Attached were photos. Grainy, low-res, clearly taken from a distance. One caught me sipping coffee. Another captured the feeder mid-swing in the breeze. And in the corner of one, just faintly, I could see a silhouette in a second-story window. Karen's upstairs guest room, if I remembered right. Someone was watching. The envelope included a compliance form, checkbox options. Feeder removed. I acknowledge violation. I contest violation. I checked contest and slid it back into the HOA's Dropbox the next morning. By now, the piece I'd found in my backyard felt polluted. Not by birds, by suspicion. Every time I stepped outside, I scanned the hedges. Was that a camera flash? Was someone filming? Were my neighbors talking? Turns out, they were. At the next barbecue, this one for Flag Day, I overheard a whisper. He's the one with the birds. Karen said they're nesting in the eaves now. Another guest, who didn't know I was within earshot, murmured, "Yeah, I heard they're aggressive. Her dog won't go outside anymore." I wanted to shout. These weren't seagulls attacking sandwiches. These were finches. But I stayed quiet. Collected. Later that week, I caught Karen at the mailbox. "Morning," I said. She didn't answer. "Look, if this is about the feeder, I'm more than happy to talk like neighbors." She smiled. A smile with no teeth. "I've already filed everything with the board," she said. "It's out of my hands now." Then she added, "Rules exist for a reason, Daniel." My name, perfectly pronounced, delivered like a warning. And then she turned and walked back to her house. I started digging. I read every line of the HOA charter. I highlighted 14 separate clauses that contradicted the claim. The document was vague. Conveniently vague. There was no definition for nuisance wildlife. No specified limit on feeders. And no language preventing structures under 6 feet tall in one's backyard. I typed up a letter. 4 pages. Attached photos, highlighted codes, and cited a county-level ordinance that actually encouraged bird habitats as part of a local conservation initiative. I sent it via email, physical mail, and dropped off a copy in person, though no one answered the door at the HOA's designated office hours. Go figure. Karen escalated again. She filed an environmental disruption claim, citing concerns over bird waste runoff affecting storm drains. I kid you, she included a printout from an academic paper on pigeon populations in urban centers. Never mind that I wasn't in a city and didn't have a single pigeon. And then the whispers grew louder. One afternoon, I saw 2 board members, Rick and Melanie, walking the cul-de-sac. They paused at my fence line, looked at the feeder, then scribbled notes on a clipboard. No knock. No introduction. Later that night, I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. Reminder: any items causing disturbance to community balance or landscape harmony may be subject to removal. No signature. Just a tiny HOA watermark in the corner. These were fear tactics, a quiet, coordinated campaign of pressure. And still, every morning, the birds came, like clockwork. Like faith. They landed, chirped, scattered seed, and sang into the air as if nothing had changed. But I no longer sat comfortably on the porch. I filmed myself while filling the feeder. Logged every visit in a spreadsheet. I installed a motion camera and captured footage proving 0 rodent activity. I was building a case. Because I knew now, this wasn't just Karen being nosy, it was Karen on a mission. A mission that was personal, petty, and about more than just birds. The pressure didn't just build, it shifted. Like something slithering under the floorboards. You couldn't always see it, but you could feel it. Humming beneath your feet. One morning I opened my mailbox and found an anonymous letter. Block letters. No return address. No greeting, just "the neighborhood is watching." Time to choose. Choose what? Choose who? That same week, someone left a bag of seed on my porch. Torn open, deliberate. Half the contents scattered across the steps like spilled sand. It wasn't random, it was symbolic. The seed, the feeder, the birds, all of it was a battleground now. Karen filed a second violation notice. This time she claimed an escalating environmental hazard. In her letter to the board, she wrote, "Excess seed attracts not only birds but feral cats, skunks, and possibly coyotes. This has compromised the safety of our community." Coyotes. In a gated neighborhood, where the most dangerous animal up until now had been a speeding golf cart, more neighbors started avoiding me. A few who used to wave stopped entirely. Others made quick detours when walking past my yard. The couple across the street, the Barclays, this to bring me muffins. Now they just brought silence. And then came the fines. $150 accumulating with bureaucratic precision. The HOA sent a running invoice, line-itemed. Time-stamped, growing like a tumor. By week's end, the total had crossed $1,050. I asked for a formal hearing. The request was ignored. So I printed out their bylaws again and annotated them. This time I highlighted where their definition of nuisance wildlife was in conflict with county environmental guidelines. I contacted the County Department of Natural Resources. I got a response. A city official named Laura Hanley called me. She was polite, curious, said she'd seen these kinds of HOA complaints before, usually exaggerated. She offered to stop by and conduct an inspection. I told Karen in writing that a county official would be visiting my property. The next morning, 2 board members walked past my yard. One snapping photos, the other jotting notes. I waved. They didn't wave back. The following day, a new sign appeared at the community entrance. Bright red letters. Notice, increased wildlife activity. Please report any sightings to HOA. The hysteria had taken on a life of its own. By the time Laura Hanley arrived, clipboard in hand, I had gathered 4 high-resolution photos of the feeder area, confirming no rodent sightings, a binder of annotated HOA bylaws. Laura walked the yard, took photos, made notes. She crouched by the feeder, examined the base, looked around for signs of animal disruption. Her verdict: no evidence of nuisance wildlife. Feeder is compliant with local code. No further action required at the city level. I sent the HOA a copy of her signed statement. Emailed it. Mailed it. Hand-delivered it. I attached a new letter of my own. Calm, firm, and pointed. That night, I found dog feces in my front yard. Not a coincidence. 2 days later, a second anonymous note arrived. You don't belong here. This wasn't about birds anymore. This was about ownership. Control. I started checking my tires every morning. Installed a second camera facing the street. Caught someone hood up, face down, standing at the edge of my yard at 1:17. At the bottom of her message was an attached document. A revised proposal for new HOA regulations. Items M3. All bird feeders shall be subject to board approval, with monthly inspections. Repeat violations may result in lien placement. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about birds. This wasn't even about me. This was about power. Control the rules. You control the neighborhood. And Karen, the woman with the laminated rulebook and lemon-scented gossip, wanted that control cemented. And if she could make an example out of me, all the better. But she'd underestimated something. I wasn't just stubborn. I was prepared. And I wasn't the only one she'd crossed. After forwarding the city's compliance letter to the HOA and being met with silence, I started digging deeper, not just into bylaws, but into Karen's past enforcement history. What I found surprised me. This wasn't her first crusade. A quick search through the HOA's public meeting minutes, buried in an old Google Drive folder linked on the community website, showed 6 prior complaints filed by Karen in the past year alone. Most were against small, quiet residents. An elderly couple fined for painting their shutters unauthorized beige. A single mom reprimanded for letting her kids chalk on the driveway. A retired schoolteacher threatened over a hummingbird garden. This wasn't rule enforcement, it was rule weaponization. That's when I realized I needed backup. So I made a call to my old friend Monica Park, a retired land use attorney I'd met during a zoning dispute back in my military contracting days. Monica had a particular talent: slicing through red tape like it was tissue paper. I emailed her the HOA handbook, the letters, the photos, the fines, and the city inspection clearance. 2 days later she called. They've overreached, she said, multiple times. They've also opened themselves up to liability, especially with the harassment and the selective enforcement. I'll draft a notice for you to send. Let's remind them they're not the only ones who can write scary letters. While Monica worked on the legal side, I went tactical. I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the city's Code Enforcement Division. Turns out our HOA had submitted multiple complaints in Karen's name that were never voted on by the board. That violated the HOA charter itself. Any formal action was supposed to go through a majority vote, documented in minutes. Karen had been acting unilaterally. Then I remembered a detail from a few weeks earlier, the blurry surveillance photo with a window silhouette. I rewound the street camera I'd installed and found footage of Karen herself taking photos from the sidewalk and crossing onto my property to adjust a garden gnome near the feeder. Trespassing. Document. I compiled everything. The city compliance letter, Monica's legal warning, camera footage of trespassing, 600. I created a single PDF, unlawful enforcement actions by HOA Secretary Karen Stevens. I sent it to. I wrote one line. Please see attached a documentation. I'll await your response before pursuing formal legal action. 2 days later, I got a call from Rick Morales, one of the quieter HOA board members. He sounded nervous. Hey Daniel, we're reviewing everything. There's going to be a special session. Just wanted to say, I had no idea it had gotten this bad. Then maybe you should have been watching her instead of my bird feeder, I said, and hung up. That weekend something changed. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in weeks waved again. A couple even stopped to ask what was going on. One older man, Mr. Lewis, a former postmaster, leaned in and whispered, "She fined me $75 for a mailbox tilt last year. You're not the only one tired of the Queen's reign." And just like that, the silence cracked. People began talking. I created a private neighborhood group online, Fair Neighbors of Oak Ridge. Within a week, 23 people joined. Stories poured in, small injustices, petty fines, intimidation. One woman had received a warning for hanging wind chimes that created tonal disturbance. We weren't isolated, we were just unconnected. Until now. Meanwhile, Monica sent a formal cease and desist to the HOA's general counsel, demanding they halt all fines, investigate misconduct, and provide a written retraction of prior enforcement. She CC'd the city attorney's office, and that's when I got the final piece of the puzzle. An anonymous message in my inbox. No name, just a screenshot of a real estate listing draft, showing 3 properties in our neighborhood, including one next door to mine, flagged as pending improvement plan, in a private investment brochure. The listing company, Stevens Realty Group. Karen's husband's firm. They weren't trying to get rid of my feeder, they were trying to clear the block, beautify the curb, silence dissent, move out the quiet, quirky folks who didn't fit the brochure vision. And I was the first obstacle. That changed everything. The next HOA meeting would not be a quiet one. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday in the Oak Ridge Community Clubhouse, a squat little building with mint green shutters and one malfunctioning ceiling fan. The same room where I'd once learned the community preferred soft jazz over country for neighborhood barbecues. This time, the stakes were higher than music. Word had spread, not just about the meeting, but about what was coming. Flyers appeared in mailboxes with a single line, HOA Transparency Night, Know Your Rights. Underneath was a link to the private Fair Neighbors of Oak Ridge group. By the time the meeting began, the folding chairs were filled, and not just with the usual handful of bored retirees. It was standing room only. Even Laura Hanley, the city inspector, showed up, clipboard in hand, standing quietly in the back. Karen was there early, seated at the head of the folding table with her hair in a stiff bun and her signature laminated rulebook stacked beside her, like a holy text. She wore a navy blouse, pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman preparing for a courtroom victory. She didn't know the courtroom had already shifted. When the meeting opened, Rick Morales cleared his throat and motioned for silence. We're here to address a number of community complaints and some questions surrounding board conduct and enforcement practices. Karen leaned in, took the mic, and began reading from a pre-written statement. Her voice was firm, vaguely legal, and utterly dismissive. In recent months, this board has received multiple reports of unauthorized structures attracting wildlife. That's when I stood. Point of order, I said, holding up a binder. I'd like to submit a formal rebuttal with documentation from the Department of Natural Resources, the city's own inspection team, and legal counsel outlining overreach and misconduct by the HOA secretary, including trespassing, harassment, and violation of HOA procedure. A low murmur rippled across the room. Karen blinked but said nothing. I walked to the front, handed Rick a copy of the binder, and placed another on the public record table. Then I turned to face the crowd. I'm not just here for myself, I'm here for everyone who's ever been fined for bird feeders, porch plants, mailbox tilt, chalk art, and wind chimes. This isn't about aesthetics. This is about abuse of power. Karen stood abruptly. This is not an authorized presentation. This man is not on the agenda. Neither were your private violations. I cut in. Gasps. Actual gasps. Someone in the crowd clapped. A few more joined. Then came the statements. One by one. Mr. Lewis, the ex-postmaster, spoke first. My mailbox never tilted. I had it reinstalled that same year, and I still got fined. Marcia Devlin, a single mom with 2 boys, held up a photo of a chalk rainbow her kids had drawn on their driveway. We were warned for this. A rainbow. Sarah, a quiet neighbor who rarely spoke at meetings, shared her story about a hummingbird garden cited for being non-compliant with lawn edging standards. Dozens followed. Each story chipped away at the facade of control. Each voice stripped Karen's authority down to its brittle skeleton. Then Laura Hanley from the city spoke. Just to clarify, the bird feeder in question complies fully with local wildlife codes. The city has no record of any violations or complaints substantiated by evidence. Any fines issued based on environmental disruption claims are baseless. Karen finally cracked. So you're saying I'm lying? Laura blinked. I'm saying no violations were found, and the repeated use of code language in your submissions does not align with actual law. It was over. But just to make sure the knife twisted with grace, Rick Morales took the mic again. In light of recent revelations, the board will be suspending all current fines and initiating a review of procedural abuse. Furthermore, effective immediately, Karen Stevens will be placed on administrative leave from board duties pending investigation. Boom. There was no applause, just stunned silence, followed by a quiet ripple of whispered relief. Karen didn't move, didn't argue. She just stared at me, not with rage, not with humiliation, but with something colder: fear. The fear of losing the thing she had built her identity around. Power. The next morning, the birds returned. It was as if they'd waited, watched the meeting from the trees, heard every word. The chickadees came first. Then the wrens. Even General MacArthur, the feisty blue jay, made a dramatic reappearance, chasing a squirrel off the feeder like he'd never left. The air felt lighter. Still cool, still pine-scented, but different. Karen's resignation was announced via email 2 days later. No apology. Just a line buried in the HOA bulletin. Effective immediately, Karen Stevens has stepped down from her role as secretary due to personal reasons. Her house went up for sale a month later. Not a word was said. One day she was pruning her roses in silence. The next there was a for sale sign half hidden behind a hydrangea bush. She didn't wave goodbye, but others did. Miss Lewis brought over a 6-pack and a long overdue story about how he used to raise pigeons as a kid. Marcia let her kids draw again. They spelled out "Welcome back" birds in rainbow chalk on their driveway. A neighbor named Felix, who'd never spoken more than 2 words to me, gave me a nod and said, "You did good. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community." The fines were revoked. The bylaws were rewritten, with input from actual residents. We even formed a new committee, the Oak Ridge Harmony Group. No secret meetings, no petty fines, just people who wanted peace, color, life. My feeder still stands. I added a second one. A bath too. And last week, I spotted a rare rose-breasted grosbeak, perched right where Lillian used to sit, and just like that it was whole again. I still sit out there every morning, same mug, same notebook, and sometimes when the wind's just right, my grandfather's wind chime sings softly from under the eaves. They tried to take away a bird feeder. What they lost was control. They thought a bird feeder was the problem. Turns out, it was the first sign of a community waking up. If you've ever faced a petty rule, a power-hungry board, or a neighbor who forgot what it means to neighbor, you're not alone. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the smallest thing you've had to fight for that meant the world? This is the HOA channel. We tell the stories they try to bury. And out here, the birds always come back.